改めまして、こんにちは。私、東京大学先端科学技術研究センターの池内聡でございます。今日の午後は特別講演会でアブラハム合意後の中東、UAE、サウジアラビア、イラン、そして地域におけるイスラエルの新たな役割と題して、講演会を開催いたしております。多くの方々にオンラインで入っていただいておりますが、同時にこの東京大学先端科学技術研究センターのエネオスホールというところで、対面でも会場を設定して来ていただいております。本日のゲストは、イスラエルのライヒマン大学アバ・エバン外交国際問題研究所の所長のマーク・レゲブさんです。マーク・レゲブさんはイスラエルの元駐英大使、そして、長い間ネタニヤフ首相の上級外交顧問を務めておられました。そして今回東大先端研のプロジェクトであるシンクタンクプロジェクトであるロールズの招聘によって来日して、さまざまな会合や研究会、そして講演会に、出席し、話していただきますけど、その多くの部分は非公開でありますが、今回特に公開のパブリックスピーチを設定いたしました。今回のテーマというのは、英語でのタイトルというのは The Middle East After the Abraham Accord, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran and Israel's New Regional Role というものですが、近年にイスラエルを中心とした外交によって中東の地域の国際政治が大きく変わりつつある。それが、今どういうふうになっているのか、特にイスラエルと湾岸産油国の関係がどういうものなのか、同時にイスラエルは朝鮮も、目の前にしておりまして、例えばイランとサウジアラビアですね、イスラエルが敵対するイランとサウジアラビアが中国の仲介によって、国交を、回復すると、そういった出来事もあって、じゃあサウジアラビアとの関係を強化しようとしているイスラエルにとって、その今地域情勢どういうものなのか、そして日本が中東においてこの新しい現実の中でどのような役割を果たせるかについて議論していきたいと思います。ちょっと今から、英語にちょっと切り替えますけど、welcome, Ambassador Mark Regev to the University of Tokyo, and particularly in this project, ROLES, RCAST, Open Laboratory for Emergence Strategies at the University of Tokyo. And we have for 2 hours time and for your lecture and discussion. So we just quickly go on to your lecture main event. And also we have invited Dr. Gedaliah Afterman, head of the Asia Policy Program of the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy and International Affairs at the Reighman University as a commentator discussant, and together with Ambassador Mark and Dr. Gedaliah, I myself will join the discussion. So please take a seat on the podium, on the stage. How do you like? Okay, you have 14 minutes, so maybe you take for this podium for your lecture.
Thank you, Professor Satoshi. I am pleased to be here at the University of Tokyo and to accept your invitation to speak. It is an honor. I have spoken at many universities, but this is my first time at a Japanese university, and I thank you for the opportunity. There's nothing like speaking directly to better understand ideas, to better understand concepts, to better understand the changes that we are going through in the Middle East and in the world. I also would like to say this is my third trip to Tokyo. But this is my first trip, not with an Israeli Prime Minister. I came the first time with Prime Minister Olmert in 2008. I came again with Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2014. But this is, as I say, the first time I'm here in a private capacity as an academic. And it is an opportunity for me to, once again, when you are traveling with the Prime Minister, and anyone who has worked for a senior government official knows that when you are traveling with the Prime Minister, you are totally focused on what the Prime Minister needs. And this is the first time I'm visiting Japan, and I can focus on what is interesting for me. And so it's for me a pleasure. We are talking about the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords is a historic breakthrough. In 2020, only 3 years ago, Israel had diplomatic breakthroughs with 4 Arab countries, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and with Sudan. Sudan was obviously more problematic. Sudan has going through a political crisis. And so this is a deal that we could say has not led to tangible cooperation. The deal is more on the paper. Though the deal with Sudan had maybe ideological and historical importance nevertheless, because we in Israel remember after the Six-Day War of 1967, the Arab League met in Sudan at the famous Khartoum conference. And they said, proclaimed publicly, the 3 no's: no to peace with Israel, no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiations with Israel. And so what was called the Khartoum Declaration of the Arab League became the basis for continued hostility between Israel and the Arab world. And that Khartoum would normalize ties with Israel had, if not practical importance, it had symbolic importance. But the real breakthroughs were with, as I said, the UAE, Bahrain, and of course, Morocco. Now, the breakthroughs of 2020 came a generation after the first 2 peace treaties between Israel and the Arab world. The first one is with Egypt. This peace treaty is signed in 1979. This was the first formal peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country. Then we waited another less than 2 decades, but a long time. In 1994, we signed our second peace treaty with an Arab country in Jordan. But then we had to wait. And from 1994 until 2020, that's a quarter century, 25 years more, we had to wait for the next breakthrough in the peace process. But when it happened, it didn't happen with 1 country. It happened with 4. And so it was, the Abraham Accords are a historic moment. And I think it's important to ask the question, especially here at the university, why did it happen when it happened? Why was it stuck from 1994 for so many years? And what happened in 2020 that made it possible? So the most logical answer is that we saw the convergence of interests between large parts of the Arab world and Israel. Maybe this is obvious and doesn't need to be stated. But for more than a generation, the Arab world saw Israel as its enemy and were hostile to Israel. But this process from the turn of the century and beyond started to change. And let me ask you, Professor Satoshi, let's think for a moment. Instead of you being a professor here at the University of Tokyo, let's think for a moment that you are the leader of a country in the Gulf. I promote you. You are the leader of a country in the Gulf, and you ask yourself, you are a prosperous country, you are a stable country, your country is a success on the international stage, yes? And you ask yourself the following question: who threatens my continued prosperity? Who threatens my continued stability? Who threatens my security? Israel? No. Israel in no way threatens your stability, prosperity, security. But when you ask who is threatening your stability, prosperity, and security, you say, as a leader in the Gulf, you say the extremists of ISIS. You would probably say Iran too. You would maybe also say the Muslim Brotherhood, the local branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So not only does Israel not threaten you, the people that you, as a leader in the Gulf, identify as threatening your interests are also the enemies of Israel. Because all three, Iran, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, they are enemies of Israel. And there is the old phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And suddenly, there was a convergence of interests. I saw this, believe me or not, at the first time during the 2006 war in Lebanon, when Israel was fighting Hezbollah. And if you were watching Al Jazeera television, you would have believed that the whole Arab world was united behind Hezbollah to fight Israel, but it wasn't true. Already then, we saw important Arab countries like Saudi Arabia distancing themselves from Hezbollah seen as an Iranian proxy, and even sending messages that Israel should defeat Hezbollah, that Hezbollah can't be allowed to win. Not necessarily because they like Israel, but because they were worried about Iranian influence in Lebanon and beyond. So you had this conversion of interests between Israel and large parts of the pragmatic Sunni world. We all had an interest in stability in the region, and we all had an interest in fighting extremism. Whether the Sunni extremism as represented by ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Shia extremism as represented by the government of Iran and Hezbollah. And it is more than that, because Israel, like the countries of the Gulf, though we are proud of our tradition and proud of our heritage, we are open-looking. We are globalized. We are in favor of globalization. We are embracing the modern world. While the extremists tend to be closed. They want to close the Middle East off. They want to make barriers with the world. They see the world as polluting their influences. And so we discovered that we had a lot in common with our Arab neighbors. We shared interests. And on the basis of those common interests, we could go forward. But I don't think this in itself explains what happens in 2020. Because this was a gradual, incremental process. It was happening, everyone knew it was happening, but it wasn't yet a revolution. Something else had to happen in parallel that created the transformation, that created the revolution. And I don't know if this is interesting for a Japanese audience, but the American role. And this needs to be discussed. Obviously, the United States under President Trump at the time played a crucial, indispensable role in making the Abraham Accords happen. And I think Trump will go down in history for many things. One of the good things is the Abraham Accords, undoubtedly. But the American role historically previous to Trump was crucial in creating the dynamics for the Abraham Accords. Countries across the Gulf, these are smaller countries. These countries built their national security on American protection. Some of us are old enough to remember, and some of us have read about the first Gulf War, when President George H.W. Bush, the father of President George W. Bush, organizes a grand international coalition to free Kuwait after Kuwait is invaded by Saddam Hussein. I think, and you will correct me because I don't claim to be an expert on Japan, Professor Satoshi, but if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time Japan is sending not combat troops, but you are sending, I think, medical ships to the first Gulf War. I think there is something, maybe I'm wrong. But no, I'm wrong. You are telling me I'm wrong, so I take it back. I'm getting confused. But this is a wall-to-wall coalition that the Americans organize, together with the Europeans. France is there, Britain is there, together with the Arab countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, of course, a wall-to-wall coalition to free Kuwait from Saddam. And it is successful. The West is coming in with power, and they are throwing the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Now, this single incident becomes the formula which all the countries in the Gulf build their national security. That if a crisis emerges, if there is a real threat to our security, the Americans will bail us out. We are smaller countries, we are vulnerable, and the United States of America is providing our ultimate security guarantee. This is all across the Gulf. Now, of course, these countries are investing in their own security. They are buying lots of very expensive American, British, and French equipment. But still, the thinking is, even though we are buying expensive airplanes and tanks and so forth, this is more to solidify the relationship with the West. But we know that if there ever is a real security threat, once again, America is our security guarantor. And leaders across the Gulf based their national security on this position, on this doctrine. From the turn of the century, for all sorts of reasons, which I will now discuss, the countries of the Gulf became less convinced of this insurance. I'll give some reasons what happened. There is the Arab Spring, and there are crowds in Cairo, in Tahrir Square, and they are calling for the downfall of the Egyptian leader, President Hosni Mubarak. And President Obama gets on the phone and he says, President Mubarak, it's time for you to go. And without American support, the Egyptian president is forced out of office. Israel is a democratic country. Japan is a democratic country. The United States is a democratic country. In democracies, when people are watching television and they see people in the street calling for freedom, or what they say is freedom, and they see a dictator who's been in office not for 10 years, but for 40 years, yes? Mubarak came to power in when was Sadat killed? 1970, 1980. Yes? You must correct me when I make mistakes like before. The people in democracies, they say, of course, we support the people in the street who want freedom and who want to get rid of a dictator who's been there for almost three decades. That's how people in the West see it. People in democratic countries. How was this seen in the Arab world? I'm not saying rightly or wrongly. I'm not making a moralistic assessment, but how was it seen in the Arab world? It was seen that Mubarak was the loyal ally of the United States for a generation. Mubarak gets into trouble, and the Americans are not there for him. This is how it is seen in the Arab world. And of course, we can speak frankly, none of the Arab countries are democracies. So just as they don't support Mubarak if he gets into trouble, will they support me? This is a crack. A few years later, there is a terrible, bloody civil war in Syria. And the regime of President Assad is using chemical weapons against his own citizens. And it happens once, it happens twice. And then the American president says, if he does it again, there will be consequences. And he draws a red line, it was said. If Assad uses chemical weapons, there will be an American response. And Assad uses chemical weapons. And everyone thought, okay, now there has to be an American response. And there was no military response. And then there was a diplomatic solution that was negotiated by the Russians. So maybe if you are in Israel or in Japan, oh, it's good. Conflict is avoided. That's always a good thing. But if you are in the Arab world and you see America is not following through on its commitment, that America is not willing to stand up to a brutal dictator who is using chemical weapons against his own people, if America is not willing to use force against Assad, will he be willing to use force? Will America be willing to use force to protect me? Second crack. Third crack. In 2015, I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm saying in the perception of Arab leaders across the Gulf, yes? Third crack. In 2015, the United States signs the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. And across the Arab world, people see the United States getting closer to their enemy. I was with Netanyahu at the time. I was working in his office. And we were invited by the Republican-controlled Congress at the time to deliver a speech. And Netanyahu agreed. And in Israel, it was very controversial. Netanyahu was criticized for going to Washington and speaking out against the president on this particular deal. Though if you read the speech, or you can watch it on YouTube, he was very, very respectful, yes, but he still, on the policy element, he came out strongly against the deal. He was criticized in Israel. The opposition to Netanyahu said he is endangering the special relationship with the United States. He was criticized in America. They said he was playing politics, that he was with the Republicans against the Democratic president, yes. He was given lots and lots of criticism. I can tell you one place in the world he wasn't criticized, and that was in the Gulf. Once again, I was in the Prime Minister's office at the time. And we got messages from across the Gulf, from Abraham Accords countries and from countries that maybe soon will be Abraham Accords countries. And they said, good what you're doing. Netanyahu is speaking not just for Israel, Netanyahu is speaking for the region. And maybe the fact that he stood up to America on an issue that was vital for us and for them actually helped bring the Abraham Accords quicker. It brought us and the Arabs together. Now let's think. Crack number one, Mubarak. Crack number two, Syria. Crack number three, the JCPOA. While all this is happening in parallel, the Americans are talking about something you like here in Japan. But the American administration is talking about a pivot to Asia. Now you like this in Japan. This is America saying Asia is important to us. We want to have a stronger role in Asia. This is good news for Japanese ears, right? A pivot to Asia. And I understand. But how did people in the Middle East think? If you are pivoting to somewhere, you are pivoting away from somewhere else. What does this say after the three cracks about American security guarantees to the region? And there was a fear of America moving away. And if you are an American ally in the region, in the Middle East, and you are dependent on American security protection, you built your whole policy on American security protection, and now you've had the three cracks, and now America is publicly saying, we are pivoting to Asia. What does this make you think about your security guarantees, about your commitment to America's commitment for your security? Remember, I go back to the beginning of this part of the talk. All these countries base their security on the fact that if push comes to shove, if there is a serious crisis, that America, like with Kuwait, will come and save them. So all these countries across the Gulf, they believed they had American insurance, and they thought maybe their insurance isn't good enough. And even when Obama leaves and Trump comes in, the Arab world loves Trump. Trump's first visit to the overseas as president is to Saudi Arabia. And he meets the leaders of the Arab world. And they liked his more aggressive approach towards Iran. And they liked the fact that he used weapons against Assad in Syria when he needed to. They liked the fact that he killed Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. If the Arab world could vote, Trump would have been re-elected. But still, there was something erratic about Trump. Yeah, he was something, maybe they thought a lack of consistency that made them worry. And in America, there is a phenomena on both sides of the political spectrum. Neo-isolationism. You see it in the left of the Democratic Party, which says America should be spending more money at home on social projects and less money abroad. And you see it on the right wing of the Republican Party, which says we are not the world's policeman. Our job is to look after America only. And if it's not a vital American interest, we don't want to be involved. We see it today, if you follow closely the debates in the Congress about support for the Ukraine war. On both extremes, On the left of the Democratic Party and on the right of the Republican Party, there is criticism of the support the United States is giving to Ukraine for all sorts of reasons. So even though maybe the Obama years are behind us, and from the Arab world's perspective, there is a president who is more open and more friendly and more understanding, they are worried also about the issue of inconsistency, and they're worried about possible tendencies that we all see in America. Neo-isolationism, America turning in, America after Iraq and Afghanistan wanting to less of a power in the world. We are worried about these things. Now, of course, President Biden says the opposite. He says America will remain engaged and America will remain committed. But there are concerns. And to be frank, as there are concerns in the Arab world, there are concerns in other parts of the world. So if you are an Arab leader in the Gulf, pro-Western, globalization, against the extremism, and you built your national security doctrine on American protection, and you believe that there are questions about American protection, just questions. You're not anymore 100% sure of your insurance. So in that case, you are seeking supplementary insurance. You are thinking of, we would call it in economic terms, if in the insurance business, you would say an additional policy. And I believe you can only understand the Abraham Accords within the framework of the supplementary insurance, the additional policy. Because if you are less sure of your major guarantor, you are looking for an additional guarantor. And Israel became the additional guarantor. Not instead of the United States, we cannot replace the United States, but to supplement the United States, to augment the United States. And how do I know this? After the signing of the Abraham Accords, all the three countries that we managed to move forward with, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, were very eager to have a visit by the Israeli Minister of Defense and by the Israeli Chief of Staff, the top man in uniform, our top officer, and by the commander of the Israeli Air Force, but not private visits, public visits with pictures in the newspapers, and everyone would know. They wanted other people in the region to see that Israel is on their side. Supplementary insurance. I think this has to be understood. Now, why is Israel a good partner for these countries? Once again, we're talking about Arab countries, Muslim countries, countries that were traditionally enemies of Israel. There was a time in Japan, you had to make a decision, do we want to be friendly with Israel or friendly with the Arab world? And the Arab world was united against Israel, and they were 20 countries, and Israel is only one country. So for Japanese, they say, well, we will keep a distant relationship from Israel, and we will embrace the Arab world. This is Japanese national interest. But this changed. The Arab world opened to Israel. And why is Israel a good partner? And here I'm being very frank. I apologize, maybe too frank. One, Israel is strong. No one wants, no one needs a weak ally. Israel is strong. Israeli military might is respected. Therefore, Israel is a desirable peace partner. Israel is a desirable ally. If Israel was weak, there's no need. It goes against some of the traditional narratives, but actually Israel's strength became one of the foundations of these peace agreements. That's the first thing. Second thing, if people in the Arab world were worried about America turning inward, about American neo-isolationism, Israel's part of the region. Israel can't turn away. We're there to stay. The idea that we will close our doors and not be involved is just not an option, correct? So the Arabs, in having Israel as a strategic partner, were taking a supplementary insurance that they think they can count on, because we are in the region. We're part of the region. When we worry about Iran, they worry about Iran. When we worry about ISIS and other extremism, they worry. We are all interested in stability in the region. Thirdly, there are many strong countries on the world, but there are strong countries, as we see with America, in the case of Syria, that are very reticent to use military force. And maybe this is a good thing. Military force should always be a last option. You should always use all the options first, and then only when you have no choice, you should use military. But the feeling in parts of the Arab world was the Americans, even when you really need to do military force, they still don't do it, as we saw with the Syria Red Line. And when you are dealing with people like Assad in Syria, if you're not willing to use force, he's not going to take you seriously. Yeah, he doesn't care about UN resolutions, right? He doesn't care about the moral position of the world. He cares about what? About force. He's a brutal dictator. He uses chemical weapons against his own people. He's not worried about the editorial tomorrow in the New York Times. He's worried about the possible use against force. And if you take that off the table, if your force is not seen as being credible, Israel, when we need to, not as a first option, but when we need to, we are using force. And the Arab world knows that Israel will use force if we need to use force. It's a bit counterfactual. When one thinks about Arabs and Israelis, we think, oh, the Arabs don't like Israel. It's strong. It uses its weapons. There's even Israel has a reputation maybe of shooting from the hip like the cowboy without thinking first. Yes, this is part of Israel's image. It's not true, but this is the image. Yeah, we always think very carefully about using force. But for the Arabs, the Gulf countries, the fact that Israel is willing to use force when it needs to use force, this was an asset. Put all this together, and you have the Abraham Accords. The convergence of two factors. One, the Arab world and Israel moving closer together from a strategic point of view, from common threats bringing us together. And you have to add to that the need from the point of view of the Arabs for supplementary insurance, for another country that could be a security guarantor. Not replace the United States, no one can replace the United States, but to provide additional insurance. Now, I'm not an expert on Asia. I already showed that I don't know something. I got myself wrong before when I spoke about something about Japan, and I apologize. But I would argue, and my expert on Asia affairs, Dr. Afterman, there are similar things going on in Asia, if I'm not mistaken, where countries who used to work in the past only through American security umbrella today want to work directly with other pro-Western countries in the region, whether it's Australia or India or South Korea, yeah? What is the Quad all about, yes? So in Israel, you must see the Abraham Accords in the same context. I will finish because I've gone over my 40 minutes and I apologize. I want to talk about the Palestinians, because some people say the Abraham Accords is at the expense of the Palestinians. And the truth is, when the Abraham Accords were first announced, so in Ramallah, there were huge demonstrations against the UAE. Very offensive things were said by the Palestinian leadership about the leadership in the Gulf. But I urge you to think about the following. As Israel grows in our acceptance in the region, as Israel is seen not as an enemy, but as an ally of more and more Arab countries, as Israel is seen by the Arab world as a legitimate part of the region. In the Middle East for years, Israel was seen as not legitimate, correct? As Israel is seen increasingly as a legitimate part of the Middle East, and the Arab world more open to Israel. Every day we have how many? 10 flights from Tel Aviv to Dubai? More. And trade, tourism, military cooperation. As Israel is more and more integrated into the region, this will be good for peace with the Palestinians too. Because if you are a Palestinian, you are belonging to the Arab world. Your identity is Arab. It says in the Palestinian Constitution, in the Palestinian Charter, the Palestinians are an Arab people. And we are proud members of the greater Arab nation. Their words, not mine. When the greater Arab nation is open to Israel and accepting Israel as legitimacy, as a legitimate country in the region, that in the medium term has to affect Palestinian hostility towards Israel. Because every country in the world has focus groups. Every country in the world has its people who you look at. Yeah? Australia is looking at Canada and the United States and Japan. The Europeans are looking at each other. The French look at the Germans and the Italians, yes? In the Arab world, they look at each other. And as Palestinians see that Israel is increasingly a legitimate part of the Arab world, that must affect, maybe not for the current generation of Palestinian leaders, but as we move forward, it must affect Palestinian thinking in a good way. And ultimately, I believe, open the door for historic reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mark Regev, for your very comprehensive overview of this new dynamism in the Middle East, particularly on the Abraham Accord and its effect to the regional situation. And from a Japanese point of view, of course, Abraham Accord is very historical. In the past half a century, really half a century since 1973, the Japanese Middle East policy is under the obsession or specter of the so-called oil shock for both government and both private sector companies. They have been fearing the rise of another crisis, particularly a crisis of oil transportation or oil embargo from Gulf Arab countries. And of course, in the past maybe 2-3 decades, that was not so realistic scenario, but still we were afraid of that possibility, and that was always put limitation on the development of Japan-Israeli relations. So it's finally, the basic finally it's over. The basic concept of oil embargo or oil shock caused by Middle East conflict is Israel is in conflict with Palestinians and also Arab states, then Gulf oil-rich monarchies will stop selling to any countries, entities which are sympathetic to Israel, friendly to Israel. That's the basic concept. But of course, at the end of 1970s, the main Arab military forces like Egypt have turned to Israeli side, where at least US side making peace with Israel, even though it's called cold peace for a long time. Still it's peace, and the treaty relations and diplomatic relations existed constantly from that time. And also Jordan took the position of diplomatic relations with Israel in early 1990s. But as you mentioned, after that, a quarter of a century, the diplomatic course between Arab countries and Israel was dormant. So 2020 Abraham Accord was a breakthrough. And so after that, I witnessed there are more active relationship with Japanese governmental ministry and also companies, private companies who are more enthusiastic in building ties with Israelis. That's a huge change, a monumental change, and it took away this psychological barrier for many Japanese who wants to have cooperation with Israelis, but at the same time have hesitation of this because of the fear for oil shock. But so it's finally over. But at the same time, there's a strong sentiment among Japanese that where is the Palestinian issue? Where is it? Even though main states, Arab states, are more, taking up the strategic, position with Israel, strategic relations with Israel, but still the Palestinian issue, humanitarian issue, it still exists. And with this Abraham Accord, it seems to become ambiguous. What kind of peace and what kind of two-state solutions will be achieved in the future. So that's these 2 points are what we are faced with. So you also touched upon both sides of this issue. Very positive achievement, also some ambiguous part of it. So
I will respond. I would say the following. First of all, you are correct. And not just Japan. For many years, countries thought that if they became too close with Israel, they will lose important Arab connections, and they had essential energy connections with the Arab world. When I was the Israeli ambassador in Britain, I would hear it from Brits as well. They would say, we have very important historic, economic, political relations all across the Gulf. Many of them used to be British colonies, yes. And this is for us a priority. And though Britain could be very friendly with us politically, they would be, on the economic side, the big British industries would be more conservative and worried that if they are too friendly with Israel and trading with Israel and cooperating with Israel, they would have negative blowback from countries in the Gulf. But this all changed. Before the Abraham Accords, it even changed. But after the Abraham Accords, today you don't have to choose between Israel and the Arab world. You can do both. Now, there's an exception, yeah? Maybe for Syria, it's a problem to trade with Israel, yes? Maybe for Libya, it's a problem to trade with Israel. But let's be clear, we're talking about failed states. They are not an opportunity for investment, and they're not supplying, I don't know, maybe Libya is supplying some oil for someone, I don't know. But the important countries of the Gulf, who are important partners for Japan, for Britain, for the world, because of the export of energy, right? All across the Gulf, they are all okay today with Israel at different levels, yes? But even the countries that do not yet talk about joining the Abraham Accords, they do not see Israel as an enemy. And so here I think we have to say, as you say, Professor, there's a time lag. The reality in the Middle East has moved forward, but to what extent is the business community stuck in a previous position, right? Stuck in something that was true maybe 20 years ago, but is not true today. If the Arabs themselves, the Emirates, Bahrain, and others are dealing directly with Israel, yes, it's obvious that we're now, for them, we are an acceptable partner, and no Japanese company is going to lose business by trading in Israel too. And this is important to remember. I'll give you an example. When Israelis used to fly east, we now have direct flights to Japan, but this is new. This is only this year, and it's a sign that the relationship is good. I flew into Narita yesterday directly from Tel Aviv. This is new, and it's very exciting for the relationship between our two countries. But in the past, when let's say we wanted to fly to Hong Kong, so you would have to go add 2 hours to the flight because you couldn't fly over Arab airspace. So you had to fly west over the Mediterranean, and then you had to go either north through Turkey and then turn east, or you went south down by the Red Sea, Ethiopia, and then you would turn east. And it was this huge detour to fly to Asia. Today, Israeli carriers can take off from Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv, and they fly over Jordan, over Saudi Arabia, over Oman, and they can fly directly, and it cuts the flying time. And this is one of the tangible benefits of the Abraham Accords. It brings Israel closer to Asia. We are always part of Asia, but now we are closer. You don't have to fly around. And this is good for us. It's good for the Arabs. It's good for our cooperation with Asia. And so this is how I answer the question. To what extent, and you, the Japanese audience will know better from me, to what extent are Japanese business still stuck in the old paradigm? I don't know. I think it's changing, yes? But it's definitely not that. If the Arabs are trading and working together with Israel, there's no reason why everyone can, right? On the issue of the Palestinians, I think we have to move forward. But it's clear there's not a magic fix. There's not an instant solution like instant coffee. Yeah? The Palestinian political situation is divided. It's between Hamas in Gaza and Fatah on the West Bank. The Palestinian political situation is dysfunctional in that you have an aged leader who is now close to 90, I think. And he has been there for a long time, and everyone is looking over their shoulder. When will this end? Yes. And you have stagnation there. And for all sorts of reasons, and maybe Israel can take part of the blame, there's not going to be a breakthrough anytime soon. So what should we focus on? First of all, keeping things quiet, keeping things from exploding, yeah? Working on economic measures, building cooperation where we can. And at the same time, I believe by pushing forward on the Abraham Accords, as I said at the end of my remarks, you are creating a climate which will make peace possible in the future. I think there's no point taking your head and pushing it against the brick wall, yeah, and just giving yourself a headache. There will be, unfortunately, not a breakthrough with the Palestinians in the short term. It's not going to happen. You need a new leadership on the Palestinian side. There are too many things. But you can create conditions both in cooperation with the Palestinians in non-political areas and in the regional area. I was in Britain, as I said, for 4 years as Israel's ambassador. And people always used to talk about the example of Northern Ireland. From the 1960s, into the 21st century, there were problems of terrorism and instability in Northern Ireland. In the end, there was the Good Friday Agreement under President Clinton, and there was a breakthrough. Why did the Good Friday Agreement work? Because it had regional support. It had support from London, from Dublin, the capital of Ireland, and from the European Union. And so the parties in Northern Ireland had the protection regionally to move forward on peace. There was a regional framework to support the peace process. The Abraham Accords can provide the same sort of regional framework, I believe, to support Palestinian-Israeli peace. It won't happen today, unfortunately. It won't happen tomorrow, unfortunately, but it will happen.
We have our discussant also is a strong speaker, Dr. Gedaliah Afterman. So, what's your intervention in our your boss?
I better be careful, but Ambassador, perhaps I'm sure. First of all, just to add to your background point, I think one of the interesting developments, or one of the important developments in the region, is that over the last decade or so, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have become the dominant political players in the Middle East. And that's so in setting the agenda for the region, they've become very powerful. And that's something that's also influencing developments. But I wanted to ask you, some people say that the recent rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran would work against the Abraham Accords and would work against Israel's chances of moving forward with Saudi Arabia. So I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you, A, how do you see things between Israel and Saudi Arabia? What are the chances? And do you think that this recent rapprochement with Iran would risk the ability of Israel and Saudi Arabia to move closer together?
First of all, about the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. What worries me is that it showed China's new role in the region. And what worries me about that is America. Israel has an interest in a strong United States and a strong American role in the region. We are a very strong security partner of America. And the fact that the Saudis, who are also traditionally a very strong US ally, felt that they needed the Chinese is, for me, I don't want to say troubling, that's probably too strong, but for me it raises questions, right? And I would like to see a more robust American presence in the region, just as I'm sure you would hear in Japan. There's no substitute for America. On the second part of your question, is it good or bad for the Abraham Accords? I would say, if I understand Saudi foreign policy, and many people in Japan know Saudi Arabia very well, the Saudis like to invest in different strategies at the same time. And so actually their rapprochement with Iran can create a situation where it is more likely that they can move forward with Israel. Because once again, they want to be able to say, well, we've done this and we're doing this at the same time. In other words, in a interesting way, it can be a cover for Saudi Arabia to move forward. Maybe they think it will also restrict the Iranian blowback if they do move forward. I'm not saying that there will be a deal tomorrow with Saudi Arabia. I wish there was, it would be good. But I'm saying the fact that the Saudis have made this rapprochement with Iran through the Chinese does not preclude normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and maybe even provides a foundation for it to happen. From an Israeli perspective, a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia would not just be bilateral Israel-Saudi Arabia. I think it would have larger perspectives. The Saudis, as this audience knows better than most, the Saudis have a very special position in the Arab world and the Muslim world. They are the hosts of the two holy sites, Mecca and Medina. They have a crucial position in the Arab League. As you just said, Dr. Afterman, you said very clearly that the Saudis have been setting the agenda for much of the Middle East together with the Emiratis. And of course, beyond that, they have their position in the Islamic Conference. And if they were to normalize ties with with Israel, jet lag, I apologize. If they were to normalize ties with Israel, I think there would be almost immediate other countries. For Jews, if the meat is kosher, you get a kosher stamp. For Muslims, if the meat is halal, you get a halal stamp. You get an authorization that you can eat this meat, yes? So if Saudi Arabia recognizes Israel and normalizes relation, you have the stamp of legitimacy for other Muslim and Arab countries to follow. I'll give an example. Indonesia, one of the successful countries in the world, but is the largest, by population, the largest Muslim country in the world. No relations with Israel, no formal relations, no normalization with Israel. If Saudi Arabia moved, would Indonesia move? Would Bangladesh move? The other countries in the Gulf that are still waiting, yeah? Oman, would it move? In other words, I believe that moving forward with Saudi Arabia would be a game changer. And it is a worthy policy goal. It is possible. I believe it is inevitable. But it will, how much time it will take, I do not know.
Yeah, on the issue of the Saudi Arabia and the Israeli-Saudi Arabia agreement, I want to follow up on this issue. And yes, I agree with your view that Saudi Arabia and Israel has a common interest, common strategic interests in regional issues, and even some global issues. And I believe in the core or top of Saudi political establishment, they have already decided they will, take Israel option in the future, and they have already, took the informal dialogue, discussions, cooperation with Israel. So I agree with it. But at the same time, it's a matter of time, but it's a matter of how long time. I think it's longer than most Israelis expect. From my point of view, Saudi Arabia or even Emirati, United Arab Emirates, yes, they have a clear, they have already decided to, how can I say, never say no policy to Israelis. So if you visit UAE, or if you visit with some using other passports to Saudi Arabia, I think you never encounter a situation, and the counterparts and Saudis, Emiratis say no to you. I don't believe it. So but at the same time, they hesitated, or they just postpone almost indefinitely to say yes, final yes, about the main target of you. So that's the present situation. And you mentioned, yes, there are so many flights from Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, almost 10 flights a day. But if you look at people on the flight, most of them are Israelis, not Emiratis. So it's a very asymmetrical situation right now. Israelis are very, very enthusiastic about this new relations, and Emiratis and informally Saudis, they never say no to it, but at the same time, they still, after 2 years, continue to postpone to say final yes. So in this case, I think from Israeli side, there is going to, there's some need for, more concrete, deal with issues, including Palestinian issues. Otherwise, they just keep continuing, maintain very cordial relationship with Israelis, never saying no. But at the same time, there's going to be no yes in the final term. So how do you think about it?
When I flew from Tel Aviv yesterday to Tokyo, I looked at the plane, and also it was most Israelis. Is this because the Japanese people are hostile? No, it's because Israelis are probably one of the biggest overseas travelers in the world. We're only 10 million Israelis, yes? But we travel, and you will see Israelis, they love to travel. And we are increasingly a richer country, yes? And when I was in Britain as the ambassador, I think in 2017, Israel passed Great Britain in GDP per capita, right? Now, this is, for Israel was significant. We were once a British colony, and now we have passed the British in GDP per capita. It was a big deal for us. And so that you don't see as many Emiratis on the plane going back and forth as you see Israelis. I can see that with a number of countries. So this doesn't worry me. I do agree that that when there is conflict, when there is violence in the region, it's not good for the atmosphere of relations with the Arab countries. But I don't think this is an insurmountable obstacle. Of course, I want to have peace with the Palestinians. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think that this is an insurmountable obstacle in moving forward with the Arab world. First of all, with the Saudis, we don't yet have fully normalized relations. But I spoke before that Israeli planes can fly over Saudi airspace. If you read the newspapers, and I cannot confirm, but if you read the newspapers, Israeli leaders have met discreetly with Saudi leaders. If you read the newspapers, there's all sorts of cooperation going on in the shadows. And publicly, we have this week an Israeli sports delegation in Saudi Arabia with Israeli passports. There is the FIFA football, digital football, what's it called? Esport. And we have an Israeli champion team, and maybe they will do well, but they are in Saudi Arabia. Now, a few years ago, this was impossible. So often when we think in political terms, we think either hostility or full peace, yes? But even today with Saudi Arabia, we're in a gray area, right? We have, so that's interesting. And we already have tangible benefits from the gray area with, as I say, when we fly to Asia, we can fly from Ben Gurion Airport over Saudi airspace. So there's already good things happening today. And even if we can't talk about them so much for obvious reasons, we used to say, mushrooms grow well in the dark, and if you put the light on the mushrooms, they will die. So it's the same maybe in this stage of Israel-Saudi relations, that we can do many things in the shadows. And the public things, though, like the flights, like the sports team, that is maybe like the iceberg. They say iceberg is 1/7 over the water and 6/7 under the water that you cannot see. So maybe that's where Israel-Saudi relations are today. About your issue of the Palestinians were against the Abraham Accords. The Palestinians were against the treaties we made with Egypt and Jordan, right? The Palestinian position is the Arab world should boycott Israel, be in conflict with Israel, until a final Israeli-Palestinian deal is signed, and only then should the Arab world open up to Israel. And from the Palestinian perspective, all the countries that are talking to Israel are breaking with Arab solidarity, and this is terrible. Yes? But the truth is, the Arab world has its own criticism of the Palestinians. There was a senior Saudi official who even went public, and he said the Palestinians missed an opportunity for peace in 1947, and they missed an opportunity for peace again in Camp David in 2000. And he made a whole list of times when there was an opportunity for two states for the Palestinians. Yes, and so there's an Arab critique of Palestinian behavior. That there is an Israeli critique of Palestinian behavior, this is not new, yes? But that there is an Arab critique of Palestinian behavior is new and very interesting. And secondly, I think there is an Arab understanding today that they can't subcontract out their foreign policy to someone else. That if you are a Saudi or an Emirati or a Bahraini or a Moroccan, you're saying, I have my own national interests. I'm a friend of the Palestinians. I want to see peace. I want to see two states. But I will not let Ramallah dictate to me my policy towards Israel. And this is a small revolution. You could say that in the past, the Palestinians had a veto, yes, like in the UN Security Council. They had a veto on Israel's relations with the Arab countries. And that veto is not there anymore. Even the Saudis, we spoke about this morning, I'm sorry for repeating myself. In the past, the Saudis would say, if Israel makes peace with the Palestinians, then we can make peace with Israel. Now, if I hear correctly, the Saudis are saying, if there is movement on the Palestinian track, in other words, movement means momentum in a positive direction. It doesn't mean a full peace. Now, you know better than most, Professor, that the Arab Peace Initiative, which goes back to the very beginning of the century, the Arab Peace Initiative, which was originally the Saudi Peace Initiative, said that the Arab world will make peace with Israel after there is Israeli-Palestinian peace. And the idea was to incentivize peace with the Palestinians for Israelis, to incentivize peace with the Palestinians by saying, if you make peace with the Palestinians, then the whole Arab and Muslim world is open for peace with Israel. So the Arab Peace Initiative might have been nice on paper, but nothing ever happened. Maybe the opposite is true. As I said before, maybe as Israel strengthens its relationship with the Arab world, with the Muslim world, this can positively affect peace with the Palestinians. In other words, instead of in-out, Israel-Palestine out to the Arab world, maybe like with Northern Ireland, yes, it will be out in. A favorable regional connection will help us move forward with the Palestinians.
Ambassador, let me connect to what you were saying about that in 2 points. First, when the Abraham Accords were first signed, many people thought the American point that you made, that this was a Trump-motivated agreement for domestic American purposes. And that led many to be quite ambivalent, many internationally, I mean, to be ambivalent, saying this is not an organic process within the region. It doesn't really serve the region's interest. But I think today we can see very clearly that it is the region's countries in the region that are pushing forward the Abraham Accords. It's a regional agreement shaped by the region and for the region. And I think that's the right way to look at it in that sense. About the Palestinian issue, again, I think regional solution is the way to look at it realistically. The kind of demand that a bilateral solution will precede the expansion of the Abraham Accord is unrealistic. But the other way around, I think it's actually practical. If we look at it, and we don't have to have immediate peace, we can start with cooperation, trilateral and regional cooperation, business cooperation, projects to include the Palestinians as well. I wanted to ask you a little bit about how do you see Japan playing a role in the region? As you might know here in the room, one of the things that Professor Ikeuchi and I have been pushing is for greater Israel-Japan cooperation, not only bilaterally, but also in the region. One of the important elements of the Abraham Accords, we think, is that it can really help to bring Asia and the Middle East closer together. And in that sense, we think that Japan should be one of the key pillars this relationship with Israel, with the UAE, with other players, and can play quite an important role. I wanted to ask if you can say a few words about that as well.
I think Israel and Japan can be almost perfect partners. Why? There's no conflict between the two countries. We are both technological countries. Obviously, you're much bigger than us. We are 10 million and you are many, many more. But Israel GDP per capita, Israel is a center of innovation, of technology. And I think we're both democratic countries, but we're both special in that we both trace our history back many years. And so while we embrace the modern world and all the opportunities of the modern world, we both are very much aware of our heritage and we are proud of our heritage. But unlike some people, our heritage doesn't make us inward looking. On the contrary, our heritage makes us, it anchors us, but allows us to embrace the modern world. And like Israel, Japan lives in a very interesting strategic environment. Yes, there are threats to your security just as there are threats to ours. And I think we should upgrade our cooperation. Now, one of the major problems, major impediments to a better Japanese-Israel relationship for years, what we talked about before, that Japan thought that because of its interests in energy from the Middle East, that this was putting the brakes on moving forward with Israel. Now, once again, Japan's most important Arab friends are today friends of Israel. And even those that are not officially friends of Israel are under the table friends of Israel. Yeah. And I think I would like the Japanese to appreciate the changes in the Middle East, yeah, and that there is a new reality, and there's no reason to move on. The Chinese are very active in Israel. They're so active that we have to put the brakes on, yes? We have concerns about some of the things, yes? But they are friends of the Arabs. They work with us, the Koreans, the Europeans. The British and French have huge economic relations across the Arab world, yes? And yet they are today with Israel. So I think it's important for Japan. Japan, you are by nature cautious, yes? But too much caution can paralyze you and not let you seize an opportunity. And I think there is an opportunity. Israel and Japan are like-minded countries. And I think if I just think on the defense side, yeah, and I know a lot is happening, but so much more could be happening. And here Israel has advantages for Japan, because not only do we create good systems, we can show you that they work because we have used these systems, right? Take an issue like missile defense, right? Israel is a world leader. I'm not saying we're the only one who has good products and good, but we are a world leader. Look at cybersecurity. We had last week in Israel, the UAE head of cybersecurity for Abu Dhabi, right? He came to an international conference and he talked publicly, because a lot of these things are done discreetly, but he talked publicly, so I can talk publicly about it. He said that Israel helped the Emirates when they faced a cyber attack. So if he can cooperate with Israel in cybersecurity, why cannot Japan? Yes, it's this whole idea that the Arabs are cooperating in these very areas with Israel. Japan can too. And I believe because of you have the industry, you have the global reach. And Japan is famous around the world for the quality of what it produces. Israel does not compete with you. We create technological, we do innovation, but is not the combination of Israeli innovation with Japanese excellence, with Japanese industry, with Japanese global reach, is that not a winning combination? We see now, for example, I'll tell you a story about Israel. I apologize. In Israel, in the 1960s, 1970s, we tried to make a car industry, okay? And we made terrible cars. Terrible cars. Not even the Israelis wanted to buy them. The only people who drove Israeli-made cars were government officials and army officers who got the car as part of their contract, yes? But no one with any brains would buy an Israeli car. They were terrible. And somewhere in the late 1970s, we closed down the car industry. Today, Israel has a car industry. We don't produce automobiles. We don't produce the wheels and the engines and this, that you do in Japan much better than we ever could. But the modern 21st century car is a computer on wheels. And the technology, especially in this whole thing of driverless cars and navigation technology, a lot of that is coming out of Israel. Waze is an Israeli invention. Do you use Waze in Japan or less so? But these are all, this is the future of the automobile industry, and Israel is part of that future. And I believe just as the French automobile companies and the Korean automobile companies are in Israel, the Japanese need to, once again, there's a time lag. There's a fear that if you sell Japanese cars or you cooperate with Israel in your production, that the Arab won't buy your cars. It's not true. Maybe it was true 20 years ago. It's not true today. And maybe the time lag and over caution is causing Japan to miss an opportunity. I think Japan also, as a responsible country, obviously the Abraham Accords contain great political benefits, and economic benefits. But because Japan is seen as a responsible country, if Japan were to embrace these accords, I think it can be good for Japanese business, but it's also good for Japan's status in the world. This is Japan supporting Middle East peace, Japan supporting Arab-Israel reconciliation, especially, and here I'll be diplomatic, yes, especially when other Asian countries are trying to show how influential they are in the Middle East. This is a way for Japan to be a responsible international citizen and to support a process of reconciliation with the Arabs, which basically the whole world supports, but Japan has the ability to be part of that process in a very hands-on way. And I think that could be very good.
Yeah, we may take questions from the floor. Maybe, okay. Taniguchi-san.
Thank you, Professor Ikeuchi. My name is Tomohiko Taniguchi. Taniguchi surname, Tomohiko given name. I'm specially appointed professor at the University of Tsukuba, and I spent some 8 years with the late Prime Minister Abe as his foreign policy speechwriter. First, we must all be very much appreciative of what Professor Ikeuchi has done by inviting a top class speaker from Israel. I think the explanation that you gave us on Abraham Accords has been the single best that anyone in Japan has ever heard. That said, I've got 2 questions, if I may. First, you said there is a winning combination between Israel and Japan, especially for the future. May I ask, if possible, if there has been any role played by the late Prime Minister Abe to make it happen? Second, your career has been, throughout your career, you have been engaged in constant struggle and battle with bias, prejudice, and one-sided accusations about Israel. Many Western media tend to dub the Israelis as villain and the Palestinians good little boys and girls. And how have you done to compete with, what have you done to actually push against those tides that are continuing? In some sense, there is inherent anti-Semitism in that tendency?
So when I came here with Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2014, we had meetings with Prime Minister Abba. And when the former Prime Minister was assassinated brutally, Prime Minister Netanyahu put out on social media and in an official statement saying that Prime Minister Abba was a friend, and that not only was he a friend personally and a friend of Israel, he thought, but he said Prime Minister Abba was responsible for the upgrading of the relationship between Tokyo and Jerusalem. And he talked specifically about, tangible cooperation between our two countries, that maybe, and obviously you know more about this than me, but maybe Prime Minister Abba understood before other people that the Middle East had changed, and that by embracing and working closely with Israel, that Japan would not have negative blowback. Often institutions, bureaucracies, I was a bureaucrat for many years. I was in my country's foreign service. Institutions have their own way of doing things, and they can sometimes be very conservative. If this is the way we did it last year, it's the way we do it again next year. This is the way institutions think. This is true of bureaucracies in Israel and bureaucracies in Britain and bureaucracies in France. There's an institutional way, and what we know we are comfortable with. And this is the way we do it. Sometimes you need a leader to challenge bureaucracies. In Israel, Netanyahu has always been challenging the Israeli bureaucracy. Yeah? I think on the issue of Israel-Japan, Abe challenged the bureaucracy and created a transformation in the relationship between Israel and Japan. I have no doubt, and Netanyahu said it in that message when the former Prime Minister was murdered. He said, I will always remember Prime Minister Abe for his contribution to the upgrade of the relationship between Israel and Japan. And I would say that, answering the question from before, that we now have to continue that legacy, yes? Because there's still more work to be done. Abe, the Prime Minister, opened the door. He created a new, he allowed us to cooperate at a much higher level, but it's up to us today to move that into a new reality and to further move the relationship up. And that's what we're here to do, but also that's what the governments need to do. I would like to see a meeting between the current Japanese Prime Minister and our Prime Minister. Yes, there's so much that needs to be done. And I think it's good for both countries. And between you and me, not just good for Israel and Japan, but Israel-Japanese cooperation is good for the Middle East, it's good for Asia, it's good for the world. Once again, we are two democratic countries. And I think if we work closer together, we talk about cooperation between Russia and Iran, yes? We talk about when bad people or countries cooperate. Let's have good countries cooperate, right? It's good for the world. On your second question, I was for many years the spokesman for the foreign ministry, and I was the person who would go on the media to explain Israel's positions. And sometimes it was difficult, especially when there was a conflict, yes, and people are getting killed. And it was not easy always to be the spokesperson of the Israeli government. But I always said the following. Israel is a democratic society. I always said to the news people, you walk down the street in Israel with a news camera and you ask people, do you like the Prime Minister? Do you agree with the policy? You ask 10 different Israelis, you will get 10 different answers, because Israelis have opinions and people say different things, and we live in an open, democratic, self-critical society. I used to joke in England when I was the ambassador there, that if there are negative stories about Israel in the British press, they first appeared in the Israeli press. Because the Israeli press is very critical. It's always looking for a politician who took a bribe for a corruption charges. It's always looking for a military officer who didn't behave correctly, or a policeman who abused someone he arrested. Yes, this is the Israeli press. This is the way we want it. We live in a self-critical society where people are free to express their opinions. We see this now in the demonstrations about the judicial reform in Israel. We have a very, very active civil society in Israel. But we are in conflict with societies, yeah, where you don't have the same level of independent civil society. On the contrary, you have, both in the West Bank and Gaza, you have authoritarian governments. I would often tell a journalist in Israel, you are going from Tel Aviv to Gaza. You are doing your report and you're going back to Tel Aviv at the end of the day and sit by the beach and watch the sunset. Maybe some of you have been in Tel Aviv and seen the sunset in the Mediterranean. It's beautiful. So you go interview people in Gaza and then you come back to Tel Aviv. Who do the people in Gaza have to live with? Hamas. If they speak out against the regime, how much tolerance do you think is for them? I'll tell you a specific story. There was an incident, I remember very clearly, where Israel hit a target in Gaza. And the press came in the next day, and there's this blown up house. And the journalist, I think he was BBC, but I don't remember 100%. He says to the person there, he says, "What happened here?" I said, "Well, the Israeli plane came and shot us with a missile." And the journalist asked, "So what was here?" "No, we are just innocent farmers. The Israelis had no reason to blow up our house." Now, if the Israeli Air Force bombs innocent civilians, this is a war crime, right? We shouldn't do it. Maybe it can happen accidentally, but as policy, we don't do it, yeah? What is the problem? The journalist comes, he goes, the people there have to live with Hamas. They cannot say that Hamas was using the house, yeah, to launch rockets at Israel. They cannot say that Hamas was storing their munitions. They cannot say that, because if they say that, they will pay a price. They're not living in a democratic, free society. And this is forgotten time and again by the international press. Israel can make a mistake. There are no perfect countries in the world, yes? We can make a mistake, but people can speak freely, not on the other side. And this has to be remembered when you report.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, any other questions from the floor? Okay. Okay.
すみません。お話しいただいてありがとうございました。私、木下と申します。すみません。途中から入ってきたので、聞き漏らしたかもしれないんですけど、一点質問があります。アブラハム合意の後に、イスラエル政権交代をして、ラピド首相とか、首相になられたと思うんですけど、その野党に政権が行って、またネタニヤフ首相に戻ってきたという中で、その政権交代、リクードが入っていない政権の中でも、何でしょう、こう中東とのこの連携を深めていくという流れはもう変わりなく進んでいくという理解でよろしいでしょうか。お答えください。お願いします。
Thank you for your question. The Abraham Accords were signed in 2020. Netanyahu was Prime Minister. When Netanyahu lost office in 2021, the new government continued the Abraham Accords and even built on them a bit. They established forums. It was called the Negev Forum, which brought in the Abraham Accords countries together with Egypt, who we had peace with for many years, and the United States, and they made a forum for regional cooperation. So you could say they even tried to expand. And then in November last year, there were elections and Netanyahu came back. And he, of course, is committed to the Abraham Accords. It was his opinion. So I think this is one of the issues where you don't see a conflict in the Israeli politics. what we did see, and it started under the previous government, but we saw an escalation of violence with the Palestinians. It started halfway through May 2022, yes? And we saw this escalation of violence with the Palestinians that happened, and then it reached more escalation just over the last few weeks. That's not good for the Abraham Accords. We don't necessarily have to have full peace with the Palestinians but you don't want a situation if there's violence between Israelis and Palestinians, it creates, what's the word, a negative dynamic. This we want to try to avoid. We have an interest in keeping things calm and peaceful as much as possible. But to answer your question, the change of government did not affect Israel's commitment to the Abraham Accords. On the contrary, when Netanyahu was running for re-election in the campaign, at the end of last year, he said, Saudi Arabia, we have to try to make a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia. He very strongly believes that. And as I said before, in my opinion, if we were to have a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia, it would be a game changer. It would be a huge leap forward.
Yeah, that was a very good question. Even without Netanyahu and Likud in government, the Abraham Accords continued to develop. But of course, when Netanyahu came back with strong, cause of the expanding Abraham Accords, including Saudi Arabia, of course, it's a continuation of this strong trend. But the present Netanyahu government administration is with different kind of minority coalition parties, so totally different from ultra-nationalist and religious Zionists. And with this, of course, for Israelis, it's okay. They continue the path for normalization. But for the Arab side, like Saudis, it's difficult. Even though there's a still continuing, discussion and enthusiasm among Israelis about the possibility or development of talks with Saudi Arabia in informal way under the surface. But I think with this government, with a strong element in the far right and religious nationalists, I think it's the chance for the near future agreement is now decreasing. So of course, in the long run, it's a very structural generational change on the side of Gulf countries, Gulf leaders. So in the long run, it may be assured goal, but in the near and midterm, I think obviously this reflects Israeli society's change inside Israel. It's a deep-rooted one. So in the near future or midterm future, this element on the right side will continue to be in the government. In this case, how do you see this effect on the future or possibility of the normalization agreement?
So I don't discount what you say, but I would say there are some things that are that look illogical, but actually works in the opposite direction. For many years, maybe the readers of Japanese newspaper were told every time Israel uses military force, yes, the Arab world is united against us and so forth. But in my talk, I talked about how actually Israel being strong can actually help you with the Arab world, that they're looking for a strong partner. They're looking for someone to be powerful, to be a strong friend and ally. And so I'm not sure that Netanyahu is prime minister. I think in much of the Gulf, there is a respect for Netanyahu. Now, I don't discount that some of his coalition partners, the Arab world has issues with, but I think maybe holding up, moving forward, has something to do with that, but also to do with America's relations with the Arab world. The American-Saudi relationship is not as good as it used to be. We saw it with what happened with the Chinese doing the deal between Riyadh and Tehran. So I think that's also a reason that is holding matters up. I think if one looks at the current Israeli coalition, the problem with the Arab world has, and our partners from the Abraham Accords, is not so much this or that policy, but it was the perception of instability in Israel. We've had the protest movement against the judicial reform. Now, Japan is a democratic country, Israel is a democratic country. We are used to having protests. Israel has had massive protests in the past. Yes, we are a country where people are very political and they go out to demonstrate, they care about the issues. I remember in 1982, we had the Lebanon War, huge protests against the war. And in the 1950s, when we had the reparations agreement with Germany, huge protests against this. We have, in Israel, we have a very political, active population. But I'm concerned that when the Arabs see protests in Israel, they relate to the Arab Spring, and they think the regime is about to fall or that there's instability in Israel. And the Arabs made the Abraham agreements with Israel because Israel is a force for stability and a strong force. And if Israel is seen as being disunited and weak, maybe that affects the Arabs. They look at us and we're not a good partner. And maybe this, more than the policies of the government, but the perceived instability in Israel will cause this sort of I would say that the momentum has seemed to stopped. If Netanyahu succeeds as he wants to do, which is to stabilize the situation and to try to create a more normal situation in Israel, like it was in the past, then I think these issues will go away. And Netanyahu was a major figure on the international stage. Yes, he had a gravitas, and because of the protest movement, it has affected the way the international community has seen him. And I have no doubt that Netanyahu knows that if he wants to return to being the statesman that he was and perceived as such on the international stage, it's very important that he work to stabilize the situation internally. And I think that will affect also the Abraham Accord countries.
I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you one more question. We talked about China's growing diplomatic role in the region, and some of you might know that there's been a bit of press about Prime Minister Netanyahu being invited to Beijing. I was wondering if you could say a few words about how you see the relationship with China, Israel-China moving forward.
So Israel is part of the West, and we are a close American ally, and it's not going to change. And we have understandings with the United States that are very clear about the parameters of Israeli cooperation with China. Nothing on the military side, not equipment, not technology. When we do Chinese investments in Israeli high tech, like any foreign investments in high tech, if there are national security implications, we won't allow investment. If we talk about investments in infrastructure projects in Israel, once again, with the national security content, it becomes more. So we have a dialogue with the Americans, and we have constraints and parameters for Sino-Israeli cooperation. But within the framework of civilian cooperation, there is no reason why we can't. China and Japan have strong trade relationship. We just saw the Secretary of State of the United States in Beijing. We saw Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, in Beijing. NATO countries, American allies of good standing, Macron from France, Scholz from Germany, the Spanish Prime Minister, all in Beijing over the last few months. So what the French and the Germans can do, Israel can do. Now, I saw the Japanese Prime Minister met with President Xi Jinping at a regional summit. So we do not belong to a regional summit to meet with the Chinese, yes? We're not in the same region. I think if Macron can visit China, if Scholz can visit China, Netanyahu can visit too. He just has to be very transparent with the Americans, what we're doing and what we're not doing, and with our other allies and friends in the region. But for Israel, China is our third largest trading partner. And we have to also, let's be frank, China has a relationship with Iran, and China has an increasing footprint in the region. And I think Netanyahu has a responsibility face to face, because in China there is a very powerful president, as we know. If Netanyahu can meet face to face with the Chinese president, they won't necessarily agree on everything, but I think it's important for the Chinese president to hear what Netanyahu has to say, what Israel's concerns are about the region. And I think, just as Blinken can say we are not agreeing about everything, but we are working, so I think it's important for Israel too. And there are some things that we can do with China. We can, like Israel is very good on agricultural technology. Let's say in dairy, in Israel, we are one of the most productive producers of milk in the world. Basically, they put a computer chip in a cow's ear, right? And if the cow is too hot, and so you spray water, or if the cow is too cold, you heat up the dairy. And if the cow has a fever, you give him penicillin or antibiotics, yes? And through technology, the Israeli cow has become one of the most productive cows on the planet, okay? So if we cooperate in China with dairy, yeah, it's not bad for anyone else. And it's good economic cooperation, and it's good for Israel, it's good for China, and people in China are drinking more milk, right? If we do this sort of cooperation with the Chinese, it's good. And if at the same time we are sharing with the Chinese concerns that we have about the region, so maybe they won't agree with everything we have to say. They won't agree, but they, from my perspective, they need to listen. Precisely because China is a power increasingly in the Middle East. I would like to see Japan increase its presence in the Middle East too. I'd like to see Japan-Israel's relationship go forward. We and Japan are, as I said before, are like-minded countries. But China today is part of the Middle East and cannot be ignored.
Thank you very much. And I think we covered almost all of our topics and already. So, okay. It's a long day. You arrived yesterday night, and today from morning we are continuously talking both domestic and regional issues. So thank you very much again, Ambassador Mark Regev, for your comprehensive observation, explanation of Israeli position in the region. in the Middle East, how it's important for Japan as a new opportunity in diplomacy and also more commercial investment ways. And thank you very much, Dr. Gedaliah, for connecting us. RCAST, Research Center for Advanced Science Technology of the University of Tokyo, and Abba Eban Institute, particularly its easier policy program is building ties between us. And now that this is one of the several steps we have already taken to develop this track 2, cooperation discussion, which will inevitably going to take fruit in the more concrete ways in our bilateral or regional trilateral relations. Thank you very much for your contribution today. Thank you.